Hello and welcome to the English Listen Lab. Today, we follow the unbelievable, hilarious, and inspiring story of Ryan Carter, a guy who spent years working in a factory, covered in grease, surviving on bad coffee, and dreams of not being there. But one day, after another exhausting shift, he did something crazy. He took his last $200 and enrolled in an online coding course. 5 years later, he wasn't just working in tech. He was running a billion-dollar company. How did he do it? Let's find out in From Factory Worker to Tech CEO. From Factory Worker to Tech CEO. Chapter 1. The Daily Grind and the Existential Crisis. Ryan's life was simple. Wake up at 5 a.m., work a 12-hour shift, come home exhausted, eat instant noodles, sleep, repeat. It wasn't exactly his dream life. He spent his days assembling parts, dodging malfunctioning machines, and hoping today wasn't the day he'd lose a finger. His coworkers were great, but they all shared the same unspoken thought. We're stuck here. Ryan hated that thought. Then, one day, after his shift, he sat in his tiny apartment, stared at his nearly empty bank account, and asked himself a question. Is this it? Is this my life? Chapter 2. The $200 Gamble. That night, fueled by exhaustion and a very questionable cup of gas station coffee, Ryan made a decision. He Googled jobs that don't require heavy lifting or soul-crushing despair. The results? Programming. No degree required, just skills. Ryan had zero coding experience, but he did have $200 left in his savings. Just enough for an online course. It was all the money he had. He could use it for rent, groceries, a somewhat edible meal, or he could bet it all on a new future. He clicked Enroll. Chapter 3. Learning to Code and Crying a Lot. Ryan quickly realized something. Coding is hard. The first week, he nearly quit 57 times. Loops? Functions? What was a Boolean? His brain hurt. His fingers cramped. His coffee consumption tripled. But every night, after his shift, he sat down at his old laptop and kept going. Slowly, painfully, things started making sense. He built a simple web page, then a calculator, then a tiny game that barely worked, but it worked. For the first time, he felt hope. Chapter 4. The First Break and the First Failure. After 6 months of relentless studying, Ryan took the next big step, applying for a job. He sent out 100 applications, got 0 responses, not even a rejection email, just pure soul-crushing silence. Doubt crept in. Maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe this was a mistake, but Ryan wasn't about to give up. If no one would hire him, he'd hire himself. Chapter 5. The Side Hustle That Changed Everything. Ryan started freelancing, small projects, fixing websites, anything that paid. At first, he made less than minimum wage, but every project taught him something new. Every failure made him better. Then, one day, a startup needed a website fast. Ryan delivered in 48 hours. They were impressed. They hired him full-time. Ryan had escaped the factory. Little did he know, this was just the beginning. Chapter 6. The Unexpected Opportunity. Ryan had finally escaped the factory. But being a full-time developer didn't mean instant success. His first real job? A tiny startup, barely surviving, paying him just enough to cover rent and his dangerously high coffee consumption. But Ryan didn't care. He was in. He was learning. And most importantly, he was free. One day, the CEO burst into the office, frantic. Our lead developer just quit. The new product launch is in a week. Ryan gulped. The whole project was now on his shoulders. This was either his chance to prove himself or crash and burn spectacularly. Chapter 7. The All-Nighter That Changed Everything. Ryan didn't go home that night, or the next night. Fueled by caffeine and sheer panic, he rebuilt the entire system in 5 days. Launch day arrived. The product worked. The CEO shook his head in disbelief. Ryan, you saved us. 3 months later, That startup got acquired for $10 million. Ryan's cut? A tiny fraction. But for the first time, he had real money in his account. More importantly, he had a reputation. Chapter 8. From Employee to Founder. With his newfound confidence and slightly improved sleep schedule, Ryan took the biggest risk of his life. He quit his job. Instead of working for startups, he decided to build his own. Armed with savings, experience, and an absurd amount of ambition, he launched CodeForge, a platform to help blue-collar workers transition into tech. The first year? Brutal. No users, no funding, just rejection after rejection. But Ryan had learned one thing from the factory: you keep pushing no matter what. Chapter 9. The Breakthrough. One day, Ryan's story, the factory worker who became a developer, went viral. Investors took notice. Within a month, CodeForge raised $5 million. Within a year, 500,000 users. Soon, companies were partnering with them. Workers around the world were learning to code through his platform. Ryan, the guy who once assembled metal parts in a noisy factory, was now being interviewed by Forbes. But he wasn't done yet. Chapter 10. The Billion-Dollar Moment. 5 years after his first coding lesson, Ryan stood in a boardroom, watching investors sign papers. CodeForge had just been valued at $1.2 billion. He looked down at his hands. No grease, no factory dust, just a pen. He signed his name, and just like that, the guy who once spent his days dodging malfunctioning machines was now a tech billionaire. The end, or just the beginning? Ryan changed his life with one decision, one risk, one moment of saying, "I refuse to stay stuck." What about you? Sometimes the smallest step can lead to the biggest change. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more inspiring English listening practice. See you in the next episode.